What are the best herbs for hydrogen dominant SIBO? So this is by popular request. Every time I do a video on methane SIBO, which I cover all the time, super passionate about methane SIBO. I think it's an underserved subtype of SIBO. There's a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of simple interventions. You can check that out here. I always get comments. I've got hydrogen dominant SIBO. What do you do? So this is a quick and simple video. We're not going to get too complex. We're not going to be talking about overarching theories or protocols, supportive therapies with prebiotics or probiotics. Save all that for a future video. Today we're just going to be talking about herbs that I will commonly turn to as frontline therapy for hydrogen dominant SIBO. So first off, what's SIBO? I'm sure you're here, you're watching this video, you know what SIBO is. I'm not going to waste your time. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's all in the name. Dysbiosis of the small intestine. It's incredibly common. Again, I think it's under-recognized. I think a lot of irritable bowel syndrome is actually SIBO. You treat the SIBO, the IBS symptoms dramatically improve or completely resolve. It was SIBO, it wasn't IBS. So again, testing for SIBO, you can check that out here, is important. It's a bit controversial. Got a lot of kind of comments and disagreements with my colleagues. They say, look, just treat SIBO if you think they have it. I prefer to see numbers on the page. I think that's really valuable for the timeline of treatment and also for you as a patient to get some clarity on what's going on. Getting a positive result on a lab after decades of feeling crap, it's a big win. And then we actually know what we're treating and we can explain why you have these different symptoms that haven't been explained in the past. It's huge. So in the clinic, I commonly see 3 different symptoms that make me suspect hydrogen dominant SIBO, and I'll be recommending a breath test or 2 depending on the complexity of the case. Number 1 would be bloating and distension after foods. The really common symptom, and this is what patients tell me when I first see them, they say, look, in the morning, completely flat tummy. I wake up, I go about my day, I have breakfast, within an hour, maybe less, sometimes 10 minutes, bam, bloated, distended, sometimes gassy, sometimes abdominal pain. Compared to methane SIBO, those patients frequently wake up bloated. The bloating might change a bit, it might get a bit more exacerbated, it might get a bit bigger, a bit more pronounced, but they kind of spend their whole 24 hours bloated to some extent. Hydrogen dominant SIBO, they can wake up a bit bloated. They tend to feel better without food. Big headline. The second common symptom, commonly see it in the practice, commonly suspect hydrogen dominant SIBO until we've ruled that in or ruled that out with breath testing, would be loose, watery bowel movements, a change in bowel movements. Really big one here, if people eat food and then they have to run to the toilet, within an hour or so to have a loose, watery bowel movement after that food, I would be suspecting hydrogen dominant SIBO. The last symptom, it's pretty broad, it's pretty non-specific, I know, would be pretty classic food reactions and food intolerances, pretty severe depending on how long someone has been dealing with hydrogen dominant SIBO. I think a lot of that's mediated around gas production by the bugs, damage to the gut wall and leaky gut, and that ongoing immune response because these things that shouldn't be passing across the gut wall into the body are, and the immune system's like, that's a problem, we got to get rid of that we don't recognize that shouldn't be here. So again, that's probably if you've been at this for a while and you've been trying to tackle this for kind of 3, 4, 5 years. There's some patients that I know that have been labeled with IBS. They might have done a round or 2 of antibiotics back in the day and they've been dealing with these symptoms for 10, 20 years and they've whittled the amount of foods down to kind of 3 or 4 foods that they just live on. So let's jump straight into it. I know I said this was going to be a short and sweet video, but I got talking. Little disclaimer here. Basically, from the video comments that I see below some of the other videos, this is not protocol driven. If protocols worked, you'd be better. You wouldn't be watching a video on how to cure hydrogen dominant SIBO. Every patient's unique, it's holistic. Sometimes frontline treatments don't work. Sometimes we need to pivot a bit. Sometimes we need to treat the leaky gut first. Sometimes probiotics aren't tolerated. Sometimes an individual herb triggers an allergy or an intolerance. Really important to work with a skilled practitioner when you're trying to tackle this condition. So number one, I talk about it all the time. I love it. It's probably my favorite herb, although it's hard to choose on the day. Pomegranate husk. This is a beautiful, red, astringent, toning herbal medicine. It is selectively antimicrobial, and it is very specifically indicated for loose bowel movements. Again, it's astringent. It tones the bowels. Really, really beautiful thing about pomegranate husk, it's just got this huge amount of tannins. They are selectively antimicrobial. They seem to be more effective against gram-negative bacteria, which are really synonymous with inflammation, gut damage. These are the bugs that tend to drive hydrogen-dominant SIBO. The beautiful thing about pomegranate husk is that it doesn't seem to knock around the good guys. So you get a little bit of a win-win there where you can target the less friendly bugs and bring them down, and you can actually support the friendly bugs and bring them up, which is the long tail approach. That's it in a nutshell. Like if we can do that, the vast majority of gut dysfunction doesn't even have to be hydrogen dominant SIBO. It could be inflammatory bowel disease, it could be methane dominant SIBO, it could be fungal overgrowth. If you can bring the less friendly bugs down and resolve them, bring the beneficial bugs up, most patients will see a significant improvement in their symptoms and a resolution long term. Oregano leaf is another herb that I would have in my hydrogen dominant SIBO mix. I use tinctures, so we're going to custom formulate them depending on your presentation. Oregano leaf is a potent antimicrobial, and the leaf, compared to the oil, has a bunch of these polyphenols in it, again, that will help to support the beneficial bugs and the microbiome and bring about balance. It's all about balance. The body's trying to find homeostasis, and it has been knocked out of balance from food poisoning, from antibiotics, from toxic, ingestion of, glyphosate-ridden food, right? All this kind of toxic food that we're eating, all of these refined carbohydrates and these sugars that a lot of children are being raised on. It's a lot of things trying to knock the body out of balance, and something like the polyphenols, they are pretty synonymous and pretty kind of broad spectrum balancers. They're antioxidants. They can just smooth things out pretty reliably. The oils in oregano leaf, that's what gives it that nice kind of aromatic, sharper kind of Mediterranean spice to it. Cavicriol and thymol, they are potent antimicrobials. They're in a very balanced amount in the oregano leaf. I don't have concerns with someone taking oregano leaf medium to long term. We're going to talk about the oil later on in this video, and I like to keep the oil short and sharp if needed. So ginger root, I would be incorporating ginger root in the majority of herbal tinctures that I make. I think that ginger root's impacts far exceeds a single condition like hydrogen dominant SIBO. It's not specifically antimicrobial against the bugs that are commonly present and driving hydrogen dominant SIBO, but some of the other benefits that it brings. Lower doses, I would use pretty high doses in methane dominant SIBO depending on the presentation and the numbers on the page. Don't get me started on methane SIBO. But on hydrogen dominant SIBO, I would still bring in a small amount of ginger root tincture. It is potently carminative, so it can really help with that gas and that bloating and the motility and the abdominal pain. Really, the first step is to be eliminating gas. If the gas is trapped, you're going to be bloated, you're going to be in pain, you're going to have all these symptoms post meals. Can be a bit of an antidiarrheal, and ginger is a potent potent, say potent a million times here, anti-inflammatory. It just settles everything down. There's a lot of inflammation and a lot of gut damage associated with hydrogen dominant SIBO. Not with everyone, but super, super common. You'll see leaky gut as a symptom or a byproduct of hydrogen dominant SIBO. Again, I think that's where most of the food reactions are coming from. So if you're a patient that has had all these symptoms for decades, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then I would be thinking ginger as a mainstay. Bring it in your food, cook with it, have really strong ginger teas. It's gonna make you feel better. If you don't tolerate it, there's other options, but it's a good place to start. The next herb that I would put in most hydrogen dominant SIBO formulas would be Clove Bud. This doesn't get a whole lot of press. I'm trying to kind of bring back the attention to clove. It's beautifully aromatic, it's carminative, it's got that acrid, warming, pungent flavor. I think the reason why it doesn't get a lot of press and a lot of attention is because it's very, very hard to take. It's a potent herb. That's the number one feedback that I get from my patients. They say, man, this tincture is working, but it's hard to take. I don't know what to tell you. We can put the clove in capsules, but just as a liquid herb, it's suspended in solution, it's ready to go, and if you can tolerate it, knuckling through. Some patients, we feel them out, start them off on a lower dose, ramp them up to higher doses if we need to, and you can take a good amount of clove as a liquid tincture. Can be very effective. Clove is potently antibacterial. Again, the gram-negative bacteria that commonly drive SIBO symptoms and the SIBO condition would be impacted by clove and reduced by clove. And then it does have some additional benefits. That's why herbs are so fantastic compared to something like an antibiotic. Antibiotic does one thing, kills bugs, right? SIBO, it's a symptom of something's broken down and allowed the small bowel to grow bacteria where it shouldn't. So reducing those bugs is essential, but you have to do all these other byproducts and these other support kind of therapies to prevent SIBO from relapsing, which is incredibly common with antibiotic prescriptions for SIBO. Relapse rate is high. The big actions that I think about with clove, associated with hydrogen dominant SIBO, it's antibacterial, it's potently antifungal, it's a bit of an analgesic, that could just be more a topical application. But the gut lining, you can kind of think about that as a topical application. You drink a liquid herb and it's coating the gut lining. So if you're dealing with a lot of pain, if you're dealing with a lot of that bloating and that abdominal kind of visceral hypersensitivity piece, clove can be a really, really big addition to get you better. Peppermint would be the last herb that I would consider an essential frontline therapy for most hydrogen dominant SIBO patients. The problem here is that peppermint can exacerbate reflux in some patients that experience reflux. It's not everyone, and that's because the peppermint oil can actually relax that lower esophageal sphincter, causing that reflux from stomach acid up into the esophagus. So you have to feel patients out, see if they tolerate peppermint. If they do, I'd bring it in low and slow and I'd ramp it up to higher doses if they tolerate it. It is antimicrobial, specifically the oil in peppermint. And then the other really, really big piece that's so important for hydrogen dominant SIBO is it is antispasmodic. In herbal medicine, we call that a spasmolytic, and it helps with those spasms and that kind of twinging and the cramping. Now, if we're talking about optional additions, this is where things aren't going well. Frontline therapy would be those herbs above. There are a few others that I would consider depending on the presentation and depending on what symptoms are kind of worsening or flaring or not improving with frontline therapies. The optional additions that we would either phase in as needed or starting with as a baseline therapy, again, depending on how long you've been unwell, how high those numbers are, how significant those presenting symptoms are. Those are all huge factors that you kind of roll through your Rolodex of treatments and treatment outcomes to tailor a specific treatment plan for you as an individual. We're talking about holistic medicine here. End of rant. Would be berberine containing plants. At the moment, I'm using berberine hydrochloride for most patients, and that's because you can't combine alkaloids and tannins in the same liquid herbal blend. And that is a real bummer. So you have to kind of make this choice. So you're going to be focusing on these polyphenol, tannin-based herbs. We've listed a bunch of them. Most of those guys would have tannins in them, except for the ginger. Or we're going to go down the alkaloid front, mainly the berberine and the kind of berberine-like alkaloids, which are really just kind of used to level the playing field and kill the bugs. There can be value there for sure. We can talk about berberine containing plants in a different video. But if we're thinking about my recommendations and covering things that would be optional additions, you can definitely bring in a berberine hydrochloride capsule. Berberine is potently bitter, so taking it as a capsule is a big one. You can get capsules from 250 to 500 milligrams, and I would be doing something like 1 or 2 of those twice a day. I'd do it with food, and I'd see if we could keep it away from the liquid herbs. Tannins and alkaloids bind to each other and they just precipitate out. You don't get the benefit of either one of them. The second big addition that I'll recommend would be oregano oil. In past videos, I've said, look, oregano oil is too strong to use up front. Again, it depends on how severe the patient is. I'm seeing patients that are chronically compromised, extremely unwell, and I will recommend oregano oil. Huge caveat here. Go low, go slow, take it with food, and take it in capsules. You might not tolerate it. It might be too strong for you. So definitely work with your practitioner here. Peppermint oil would be another possible addition. I'm turning to peppermint oil sooner than before. This is kind of a new addition to my practice, and it's coming in a little bit sooner than before. I see it as a potent anti-spasmodic, so that real pain and that muscle cramping. It's carminative, so it helps with that gas and that bloating. And as peppermint oil, you can really ramp up the intensity of the antimicrobials. That's what we're talking about with oils for the most part. So that's the video. Hopefully you got something out of it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That helps me make more videos to help you guys. And you can check out another video on SIBO treatments right here.